and took up the issue of criminalization of politics and released the list of candidates contesting elections in 1998-99, it was a sensation. But time and experience taught me that ultimately these are all symptoms of a larger malaise. Much of what we're discussing today, including what Dr. Zaidi was talking about, when he was talking about the numbers of the trust, political trust, raising 171 crores or 270 crores, I was inwardly laughing because almost everybody from Telangana and Andhra Pradesh would look at these numbers, and King Shiknag is here, he would tell you these are absurd numbers. There are some of our parliamentary candidates who raise that kind of money, individual candidates. In the two states of Telangana and Andhra Pradesh, without too much of a dispute, the expenditure incurred in the parliamentary election was at the order of about 2,000 crores. In the recent Greater Hyderabad Corporation election, 150 wards, equivalent of some 21 or 22 assembly segments and 3 parliamentary constituencies, GHMC election, for a body which has absolutely no power, which is inconsequential, really, which is ornamental, the expenditure was of the order of about 1,200 crore rupees. So in the context of that, some of our very well-meaning, well-conceived, very legitimate, genuine efforts, they pale into insignificance. And that's the context in which I would like to make the following brief points. I have gone through the note prepared by the ADR team about some of the electoral system changes. Ever since R. Venkatraman, the former president, raised the issue of 50% plus one vote as a panacea to the problems of elections of India, I keep seeing that proposal time and again, including I think the Election Commission's own reform proposal. I can say it nicely over a period of time. I can say it bluntly, quickly. It's an absurd proposal. It doesn't make any sense. It doesn't change anything. At best, what we will do is, after the first election, you'll have a second round in which you will only have 2 candidates. Therefore, there will be an automatic arithmetic majority vote. It doesn't mean anything. Proportionality, I'll come to that later. But if you're looking at proportionality, because there is disproportional outcome in this country, again, it's a bad reason. I visited the UK sometime in 2005, a few months before the last parliamentary election that Tony Blair won. I accepted an invitation. Normally, I reject most of the invitations, but that time I deliberately accepted because I wanted to assess whether in Britain there was a chance of hung parliament in that particular election. Because that was post 9/11, there was a lot of angst against Tony Blair, and therefore there was a chance that we hung parliament. And then Jenkins and others were arguing in favor of a change. Liberal Democrats, they will force a systemic change. And as an Indian, my concern was if Britain changed it, I could force the pace of change in India. When I realized that the electoral arithmetic was such that Conservatives would still lose and there would be a clear victory for Labour Party, I gave that up. But if somebody in Britain asked me for advice, should we change to a proportional system, I would say you're being foolish. You don't change an electoral system merely because of disproportional outcome. I'm not arguing against change. I am the strongest advocate of change in this country. But if you don't understand the causes and therefore consequences, you don't know what you're seeking. Let me give you some numbers. I asked my team to quickly give me the data. They furnished me an email, so I just now looked at it. In the 2005 parliament election in Britain, Labour Party got 35% of the vote but got 55% of the seats. That didn't make the government illegitimate or ineffective. In fact, far from that. In 2010 election, when Cameron became the Prime Minister for the first time, Conservatives got 36% vote and they got 47% seat. That didn't make Conservative government either illegitimate or ineffective. In 2015 election, held just recently, a few months ago, Conservatives got 37%, just about the same percentage as last time, but they got 51% seats. That doesn't make Cameron illegitimate or ineffective. That's not the reason why we should change. There are compelling reasons, but not this reason. What are the real problems of our elections? First of all, what do we seek from an electoral system? In a fair system, in a sensible society, what do we seek? The first thing we seek is, apart from political participation of the ordinary citizens, We require the public-spirited citizens, the best and the brightest in the country, that they are welcome to political process, that there is no entry barrier. Dr. Zaidi mentioned, and we all know, there is a huge entry barrier in this country. The best and the brightest, except on occasion by accident, are simply not welcome in our political process. The second purpose of political process is, not only should they be welcome, but the best and the brightest, the public-spirited citizens across the parties, doesn't matter, Hindu, Muslim, left, right, center, liberal, conservative, it doesn't matter. But the best and the brightest, they must be allowed to rise politically through ethical means, not through somebody's gratis, not because somebody blessed them, not because of the accident of fate, but through ethical means they must be able to rise and acquire positions of power. That's when the society is safe. Again, we are far from that reality in our country. Occasionally, somebody truly public-spirited might still emerge as a leader, but that's more by accident than by design. The third purpose of electoral process is that the parties offer credible alternatives in terms of policies and agenda. It's not merely tweedledum and tweedledee. It's not about who is in office. It's about what happens in office. That partly is happening in India, but not substantially. We all know that. There really is nothing to distinguish between the political parties. Look at the Congress party's agenda at the national level and BJP's agenda today. To be honest, forget the rhetoric and other things. Do you see any significant change? Do you think this budget could have been different from any Congress budget? Rajat, you are an economic analyst. So it's not that there is zero difference. That will be also wrong. There is some difference, but very marginal. And finally, once you're elected to office on the basis of the agenda on the platform that you have promised to the people, you must be able to actually deliver on this promise of change. It's not merely a make-believe thing. If anything, the 20 months of experience of the past 20 months after 2014 election, or experience after every general election in this country shows us that once the euphoria of the election subsides, nothing much really happens. And therefore, to change these four parameters, we require change. So my appeal to you is, don't look at elections as a mechanical process. Look at this whole thing as a political governance process in a vibrant but messy and complex and ungovernable and increasingly unwieldy democracy. How do you make these four things happen? Today, we have a huge problem. The elections symbolize three terrible wrongs in this country. One is abnormal money power, already mentioned that, and it's much, much, much more than what the Election Commission can officially acknowledge, or most people in this audience actually know. It's not the legitimate expense in elections that's the problem. In 2003, I engineered, after the Tehelka scam, the law on political funding. The current law on political funding was largely my creation. I am proud of that. If political campaign finance is a problem, that problem was already solved in the country. That is not the problem. The problem is the illegitimate money chasing the votes in the form of vote buying. It is not campaign finance at all. And that's the reason why we have 10 crores per assembly election in states like Telangana, Andhra, Tamil Nadu and Karnataka. These are, of course, the worst offenders in the country. Other states are catching up, sadly. They're not as bad yet, but this example is now emulated by the rest of India. The second is, and it's not merely the question of money power, divisions in society. In the last 12 months, you notice the four major agitations on caste reservations. You remember Rajasthan Gurjars? Do you remember the Patels of Gujarat? Do you remember the Kapus of Andhra Pradesh? And the most recent, the Jats of Haryana. And you'll have more and more and more. This is only one example. On region, on religion, on language, and of course on caste most of all. There is a fomenting of division deliberately for political gains. Now, is the electoral system actually making it worse, or is it making it better? Caste is not created by the political process, let's be fair. But the political process actually is aggravating this, is mobilizing the caste-based or region-based or religious-based support all the time. Then we need to do something about it. That's not the way to build a nation. That's not the way to build democracy or rule of law. The third is a freebie culture. Is the government about governing the country and providing the basic infrastructure and education, healthcare and rule of law, or is the government about offering freebies and plundering the rest of it and doing nothing else? On all three, we have a serious problem, and almost all mainstream parties are guilty. There's almost no party which has any role in governance of this country at any level which is not guilty in this. They're almost all equally guilty. So how do we address this challenge? My appeal is we have to look at a change of electoral system, but not 50% plus one for the reason I stated. It's simply a perfunctory change, gives an illusion of change, doesn't change anything at all. Unless the incentives are changed for the voter, for the candidate, for the political party, and for the political system as a whole, nothing changes. Far too often we have promised a new sunrise in this country. Far too often we are promised a revolution with every election in this country. Far too often we are disappointed. We must be very clinical, calculated, thoughtful, mature about what we seek. If we don't even know what we want and why, we will certainly get some terrible outcome. After years of introspection and careful study and enormous evidence gathering, obviously there's no time to go into that. The FDR website has enormous data and we could have offline discussion. I believe that we have to move towards some form of proportional representation for the reasons I have stated, not because of disproportionality of outcome. And the simplest model would be, for Indian conditions, not the complicated Australian model is ideal. We have an alternative voting system with each voter having a preference of the candidates in the slate, but that's a sophisticated system. It's a nightmare in this country. It will never happen. But the simplest form in this country would be if we choose a party, because most election in India is really a party-based election. And the party for each state comes up with a slate of candidates in advance for the assembly, for parliament, etc. Of course, obviously they can't give for the whole state, but there will be a larger, what's called multi-member constituency. And if the seats are apportioned to the political parties on the basis of the share of the votes that they get, and there is a method of doing it. There are many, many methods. I don't want to go into this. It could be fairly technical, but that's not important for us. The basic outline, if you understand, that's enough. Then I'm arguing that will radically change the outcomes. Please don't think of it as merely proportionality, because election outcome will not be the same as today. The moment people know that my vote has a value, it will not be wasted. It will have outcomes in terms of legislative election or parliamentary election. Then the people vote differently. You would have noticed the moment a party becomes a third party, suddenly the party becomes zero overnight. Have you noticed? If the party seem to be among the first two players, suddenly the party becomes all important. It's not because the party has become important, but because now it is seen to be viable, people are now making strategic voting. So it's really the incentives to vote. And in our system, because the bar is too high, and the entry barrier is too terrible, and the expenditure is too ignoble and illegitimate, we have got horrid outcomes no matter which party wins. It doesn't really help us if we defeat all these fellows, because in any way, as political scientists call, we have disaggregate volatility in India. 2/3 of all the members are losing in every election. Either they are not put up as candidates or they're not re-elected. It doesn't matter which party is coming back to power or not coming back to power. Legislators, MLAs and MPs, 2/3 in India are never coming back to power in the next term. So it doesn't make a difference. The real issue is you must change the outcomes in terms of the behavior of parties, behavior of candidates and voters. And if you have a proportionality-based system with the state as a unit with a certain threshold, you can't have an Israeli system where, I'm closing, okay. An Israeli system where even 0.5% will get representation. That will be a disaster. Then you have all kinds of heterodox, dangerous, extremist groups finding presence in parliaments. That's not the idea. We must have a reasonable threshold. We can all figure out what is the threshold. My own sense is between 5 and 10% in a major state is a reasonable threshold, state being the unit. Because by experience, we all know that's not a small vote, that's significant. And it's reasonable to assume that with that kind of a vote, very extreme propensity may probably be contained. There will be always some risks, but they can be balanced by the better outcomes. But that's a matter of detail. But that's not enough, because we have gone too far. If we have had the luxury of going back in time and designing what should happen in 1947 or 1948, 49, 50, 52, things would be different. We messed up quite a bit in some respects. We've done pretty well in some other aspects. We don't have the luxury of going back in time, but we have the luxury of understanding what happened and setting things right now. Because we have four terrible follies in this country. One is asymmetry of power. Even an ordinary election commission employee, a clerk in a revenue office, who are these election commission employees? It's not the election commission in Delhi. It is the hundreds of thousands of ordinary clerks and revenue inspectors and in case of municipal corporations, the municipal employees, the routine fellow, the day-to-day fellow who is extorting money from us for a birth certificate and a ration card and a land record. He is not an angel who is suddenly descended from heaven. But even that clerk in a revenue office is bigger than 90% of the people of this country. There's tremendous asymmetry of power, both economically and in terms of a social status. He or she enjoys much greater power. There's tremendous asymmetry. Two, the service delivery is obnoxiously bad in this country, appallingly bad. We all know. Though things are improving in some sectors, but on the whole, even today, to get your house building plan approved or a water connection sanctioned or a power connection sanctioned, earlier days, thank God, after 1991, there's no longer a problem. To get a telephone connection, we all know how much we faced or how much we continue to face. Appalling service delivery. The third is, they're available on the website. Very soon, hopefully, I will write a book on this. And therefore, we must look at local government empowerment. Not the 73rd, 74th amendments. It's a disaster. We have overstructured, underpowered local governments which have no consequence whatsoever. The two amendments together, they have 7,700 words of verbiage, whereas the American Constitution, when it was promulgated, had only 4,700 words. And even today, with all the amendments, US Constitution has only 7,400 words. Our local government's constitutional chapter is bigger than the American Constitution today, but it means nothing. It's a myth. We require serious local empowerment. And finally, let all the power, except the power exercised by the Parliament and the federal government under Schedule 7, flow to the states, including the manner of governance, local governments, electoral system. You can't change the electoral system in the country, but you can certainly change in a state. Why should you impose some wretched governor from Delhi, whichever be the party in power? They may have their own governor be elected directly to head the government. They may have a proportional system. They may have a local government designed in a completely different way, as long as it's democratic. As long as it's broadly constitutional. Nowhere in the world does the parliament tell you how a panchayat should be run, only in India. Our parliament even tells you how to run, how a cooperative should run. I was the man instrumental for the 97th amendment, that is to liberate the cooperatives. But I was horrified when they came up with the Chapter 9B. Even with the best efforts, I could not really exclude that from the Constitution. Now the matter is before Supreme Court. Hopefully the court will say it is quashed. We have overwritten some of these things. Bring about these three changes: proportionality-based system, give the states complete powers to decide what kind of governance they want within the state. In other words, let the states have their own constitutions in respect of subjects under their control without in any way diluting or diminishing. And I'm being extremely careful. I am the greatest nationalist in this country. I know the dangers of Fissiparous tendencies, but it does not mean that you have a uniform state model where Delhi decides everything and the Constitution makers tell you what to do in your village or a town. Give powers to really govern. Let them mess up sometimes, doesn't matter, but somewhere somebody will listen, they will do the right things, we'll learn from them, we'll emulate, and that's how the market works and things will improve, and empower local governments in a responsible way. And if that kind of electoral reform is what we're looking at, that systemic change will dramatically alter the consequences for citizens by changing the incentives for behavior for the citizens, the voters, the candidates, the parties, and the governing system on the whole. I hope that we will live to see that day within the next few years, at the most hopefully in a decade, because if we don't do it, I'm certain that the next generation is a lost generation in this country. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, JP.